I just think it's vital to be orthodox and upright, and that sometimes the kindest thing we can do for those entrusted to our charge is to leave. Some people would think I was wrong about that, but I think sometimes that may be because then they say, oh, this really does matter. Yeah. Oh, this is really serious. I tend to be a bit depressive, and I sort of think, oh, this is awful. And I've often reminded myself that on the last day, the Lord Jesus will raise up every man, woman and child the Father has given him, and nothing's going to change that.
Well, welcome to our Tron Talking Points podcast. A little bit unusual this time because we're not doing the normal weekly podcast, but we're taking advantage of the fact that we are in the middle of our expository ministry conference, and I'm sitting down with an old friend and colleague, Christopher Ash, who is up as one of our speakers. And Christopher, it's lovely to have you with us again. I couldn't believe it was quite so long since you were here. I thought it was just 3 or 4 years, but I think it was 2016.
I think it was.
Yeah.
It's really good to be back.
Well, it's lovely to have
Carolyn and I are loving being back with you all.
Well, it's great to have you, and we're very grateful indeed. Now, many folk listening to this podcast, I think, will know you through your books, because we have all your books on our bookstall and we promote them regularly, and lots of folk will have read them. But maybe beyond that, for our folks here, most won't have met you perhaps in any other context. So maybe we could just start with telling us who you are, where you came from, and what
Sure,
you do.
very happily. Yes, I came to faith in Christ when I was 17 at school, and will always be grateful for those who brought me the gospel. I was an engineer at university in Cambridge.
I didn't know that, gosh.
Yes, amazing really, isn't it? I was good at exams and a terrible engineer, so that didn't last long. And then I taught maths for 12 years.
I knew you taught maths.
Yeah, I taught maths for 8 years in Dorset, during which time I married Carolyn, and we had our first 2 children. Then we moved to Edinburgh. I was head of maths at a school in Edinburgh, and then our 3rd child was born in the Western General Hospital in Edinburgh.
Is that right?
And then we moved down to Oxford. I trained for ordained ministry, and our daughter was born. And then I was an assistant minister at St Andrew the Great Church in Cambridge, and then led the first of what's now 4 church plants from there.
Right. And that was in Little Shelford.
Yes,
near
Cambridge. Little village just outside Cambridge. Yeah.
And I think that's when I first got to know you, when I was working at the Proclamation Trust.
Oh, yes, and I probably came to conferences.
Yeah. But then, just as I left and moved back to Glasgow, in fact, you quite literally moved into the house we've been living in, because in 2004 you came to follow David Jackman and be the director of Cornhill in London.
I did. It was a great surprise when David asked me to do that, and a great joy. It was a sadness to leave pastoral ministry.
Yeah.
I've missed it from the day I finished, because that's the best job in the world. But Cornhill was such a privilege.
But it was always the problem with Cornhill, that the person that we needed to come and do it was a person who didn't want to come because they wanted to be in pastoral ministry, which is why
exactly
we needed that kind of person.
Yeah.
And then remind me, how long then were you at Cornhill in London?
I was at Cornhill from 2004 to 2015, so 11 years. I'd hoped to do more, but in 2012 I had what you'd probably call a nervous breakdown, something like that. I had a difficult time. And I recovered enough to teach and do my duties, but I wasn't really recovered. So in 2015, I stood down. Some years earlier than I'd intended to, actually.
But you kind of moved sideways, because you didn't retire.
No,
you continued, and you're now. Just tell me the official.
They call me writer in residence at Tyndale House in Cambridge. Does that not sound grand?
It sounds very grand.
It sounds. It's a great job. I have no duties.
But the main point for people like us is that you are writing and still writing.
Yes.
And you've been producing a lot of books, haven't you? And just finished a real I suppose it is perhaps your magnum opus, a big 4-volume commentary on the Psalms.
Yeah, it's a monster, really. It's a 4-volume commentary on the Psalms, and its focuses on being Christ-centered, really trying to reconnect with the first 3/4 or more of Christian history, in which Christ was pretty central, really, when reading the Psalms.
So you've got that under your belt and taking a bit of a breather.
Yes.
But you're going to continue.
Yeah, God willing.
Yeah.
Yes, God willing. I'm trying to write a little pastoral book for the Good Book Company on being a Christian in your 50s, 60s, and maybe early 70s, which I want to call the afternoon of life, as opposed to the evening.
Yes, as I get closer and closer to my 60s, I kind of feel that it's the beginning of middle age rather than old age. But
quite right. Yes. Well,
my body doesn't always quite agree.
I turned 70 at the end of last year, and
you're almost in sort of middle age now. Then
I like to think it's still the afternoon, although there are days when it feels more like the evening.
Yes, indeed. But so it's been great having you here, and you've done a couple now, one more exposition to come. And we've been looking at the book of Lamentations, which is probably not top of the list of what most people would sort of expect to have at a Christian conference, but very necessary. And you've been doing a bit of teaching on that in various places.
A little bit.
What got you into Lamentations at this time?
Well, it's partly that I'd finished the Psalms and I wanted something shorter, but it's also, I think, a sense that it's a little known book, these 5 sad poems, and that it's timely and it's neglected, and we need to learn how to be sorrowful well. So I'm learning all the time from it. It's a difficult book. It's a painful book, but I feel in God's grace I'm making some progress.
Well, as many who are listening will know, as a church, we're in a time of sadness and grief at the moment with our staff member Phil being so very ill, and it just suddenly it makes people realise, well, how do we express ourselves to the Lord when stand up and be happy and sing isn't appropriate, or it's certainly not what you feel able to do. And I mean, so many of the Psalms are lament.
Well, that's it. And it's in so many churches where we never sing Psalms in any form. It's very hard for musicians to find suitable songs to sing. But as you rightly say, the Psalms have plenty.
One of the things that you've mentioned in terms of Lamentations, but also Nick Tucker, one of the other speakers, brought up this morning, was having to talk about some of the very challenging doctrines and issues that come out in a Bible passage. It may not be the only thing or the main thing even, but sometimes it's inescapable. And he gave the example of the church in Pergamum that he was to preach on and the sexual immorality issue, and it turns out he's to preach on that the very week the Church of England are making some pretty calamitous decisions about that area, and the frightening reality of that scripture that says this will make the risen Lord Jesus an enemy of his own church. I mean, it's very poignant, isn't it? And you obviously, with your background, Anglican ministry and so much involvement with many people in it, you will know much more about that than we do up here. Although, as you know, we've a bit of over a decade ago, very much enmeshed in all of this. But it must be very hard and saddening for you, but also for many others that you will still know in parish ministries and so on. It's
desperately sad, and we've watched you know, our brothers and sisters in Scotland a decade or so ago going through this, and we've watched and prayed, and now it's catching up with us. It is dreadful. I mean, in the Church of England, we've had rogue bishops, sometimes quite prominent and way away from the truth, but they've been rogue bishops. We've never had both archbishops and the large majority of the bishops pressing the Church of England in a direction that is clearly false teaching. I mean, it's desperately sobering. I applaud the small number of courageous bishops who've stood against it, but there aren't many.
And there is a difference, isn't there, when it's not just some individuals, but it actually becomes really the voice of the church, because
Yes.
you can say, well, I don't agree with that, but there is a corporate
Yes.
involvement that you can't easily separate yourself from, isn't there?
And there's a peculiar tragedy when a national church, I mean, as you've had in Scotland, when a national church does something of this kind, because you go around, similar in Scotland really, in cities and large towns, it's not such a big deal because there'll be other places where there's a faithful gospel being preached. But you go into villages and often there's nothing else.
The church.
There's the parish church. Yeah. And if the parish church loses the gospel, it's desperately sad and serious. It really is.
And of course, the Church of England is much bigger than the church in Scotland, I suppose, but England's a much bigger country. But there's huge variety, city, rural, all the rest of it. Obviously, it's very sad. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. I suppose the questions, though, have to ultimately become, well, what's going to happen?
Yes.
What are people going to do? What are churches going to do? Yeah. What are large groups? Yeah. Do you have any sort of sense of that?
It's really difficult. So there's another synod, General Synod, just coming up in early July, and the bishops are offering those who don't agree with this, as far as I can see, they're going to offer us delegated ways of differing. In other words, it would need the permission of a diocesan bishop to come under other oversight. And that is not acceptable for something like this, for all sorts of good reasons. The Church of England Evangelical Council is giving a really, really good lead, actually, for those who want to hold to orthodoxy on this question.
And that's quite a broad.
It is. I was invited in January to their residential conference. I'm not a member of the council, but I was invited to go in as a guest and do one of their Bible expositions. Yes, it has some complementarians, egalitarians, charismatics of various sorts. It's quite a broad coalition in a way, but clearly united that sex is between a man and a woman in marriage. That's one of their sort of bottom line things, that they're all agreed on that. And it was really quite heartening to see that kind of unity, and they're making a good stand. How is it going to work out?
Do they have? What actual clout do they have?
They have none. They have none. It's just they're a rallying point for those who want to stand up for orthodoxy. And churches like St Andrew the Great in Cambridge, where we belonged until recently, making a clear stand, distancing themselves from these false teaching bishops. But
what does that mean in practical terms?
Well, it means they're not giving money to be used in a vague sense. I mean, they are giving money, but targeting it at those where the gospel will be preached. They're not having these bishops to come and do ordinations and things. But the difficulty is that the bishops actually hold all the cards. The way the church polity works. The bishops, you can't, well, when a senior minister retires or dies or moves, you can't put in a new one without the diocesan bishop licensing them. You can't do it. And ordinations can't happen without the diocesan bishop. They might delegate it to somebody else, but that's their choice. So it's really serious, and I don't know how it's going to work. It's very, very serious. And you think, well, what's going to happen to All Souls Langham Place, which is making a clear stand for orthodoxy? So nobody has any idea how it's going to work out, but we know that it's very serious.
You mentioned that you're no longer in St Andrew Great. You've moved to another church, which is not in the Church of England.
Yes, we've moved to Cambridge Presbyterian Church, and we're very, very happy there. We didn't move in protest. It was for personal reasons, needing to find a smaller church. But it's a lovely fellowship, and we love it. I suppose it's fair to say that we're not heartbroken not to be quite in the thick of the Church of England at the moment.
Yeah. No, I used to sometimes preach there when Ian Hamilton was a minister there, who I knew well, and when I was in London, sometimes used to go up and preach there, which I enjoyed. I suppose, yes, I can totally understand it. It must be quite nice in a way to be at least a little bit personally
But we
situated.
feel,
But of course
and we want to support. And actually, in Cambridge Presbyterian Church, we pray for faithful Orthodox Anglicans who are standing for the truth.
And I think it's naive to think that just because you're not in the Anglican Church, just as people who, in Scotland, we're not in the Church of Scotland, but it doesn't really affect us. Yeah. I mean, what happens in the national church affects you whether you're in it or not. I mean,
it really does.
And what happens in the Church of England, it has a huge effect, even on us in Scotland, because it's thankfully to me, anyway, we are still a United Kingdom. But the fact is that the influence of the Church of England is
and the Church of England is a sort of has been a protection barrier in a sense. Yeah. But when the national church keels over, it has huge implications for Baptists, Presbyterians, Independent, all sorts.
I do. I mean, it's interesting for us in a way, looking at things sort of 12 to 15 years on, because I suppose, it's 15 years ago really this year that our big General Assembly, where it all completely blew up, happened. It took a few years beyond that. We finally had to leave in 2011 and were thrown out of our building in 2012. So that's 12 plus years ago now. It's interesting looking back. I quite a lot of folks from different parts of the world actually have come and seen us and asked about our experience then, from Canada as far afield as New Zealand. I mean, other Anglicans and folk in other denominations. What struck me as interesting is that our experience really was so similar to folks in Canada, in the Anglican Church, which obviously happened. That was the first one in the Anglican Communion. We actually went and spent some time with David Short in Vancouver, literally a month before that 2009 the 2011 General Assembly it was, and to hear the language that they use, their whole experience. I mean, it was almost a carbon copy, even though the church polity is slightly different, the situation is slightly different, the issues and even some of the catchphrases were exactly the same. Yes. And it was helpful to realize this is not a little small denominational problem. Yeah. There were people, I think, in Scotland who thought, this is evangelicals haven't handled things properly as well as they could have done in the Church of Scotland. That's why this has come. Yes. But you go to Canada, you hear about America, you hear about New Zealand, Australia, you realise this has nothing to do with parochial evangelicals getting things wrong. This is a global, or at least a Western world issue of lurching away from Christianity.
Looking back, Willie, what would be the main sort of things you'd want those of us in England to bear in mind as we walk through similar struggles?
Yeah, I think probably the most important thing I would say is fear not, because there was an enormous when you're people from different church backgrounds don't understand this. People who've been in an independent church all their life don't understand it. But when you've been in a big denominational structure or something like that, there is a great deal of fear, and there's a lot of fear engendered in you about the big bad world if you leave this. Leaving the mothership, you're going to be adrift on your own and all of that. And I mean, I think honestly we felt that. And certainly we were made to feel that. Yeah. And I remember quite distinctly one of the high hegians of the Church of Scotland, giving that warning. It's a tough world out there, and you're all going to sink. And when you're in the battle and when things are tough, those are the things that stick in your mind. Yes. It wasn't true. Yeah. We look back. And the churches that left with us, and there weren't that many, but 20-something or whatever churches, more or less in their entirety, or a fair part of them. And they're all doing well.
Yeah.
And all the ones I know have grown. By contrast, I'm afraid it's not the same for those that I know of that stayed in order to protect their churches.
Yes.
Actually, the opposite has happened. So don't fear. Yeah. I mean, it's not to be treated lightly. And I think, if we were... Other people also misunderstood what we were doing, I think, thinking we were on the quest for the perfect church.
Yeah.
If that was our mentality, we'd never have been in the Church of Scotland to begin with. So we were not sectarian and purists in that sense, and unrealism. We were very, very reluctant, non-schismatic leavers. Yes. That's the truth. So it was reluctant, it was hard, it was difficult.
But tell me a little bit about this, what I suppose we might call friendly fire. I mean, because it's a big thing for us in England. People will make different... People of orthodox convictions will make
different choices. I think we tried for quite a long time with various things to unite evangelicals who could stand together. Yeah. And I think to a large extent we did stand together, but what we thought we might be able to do is all move together. Yes. And that proved to be illusory. Yeah. And I think we came to the point where we realized we can't do that, and different people are going to do different things. I think we'll probably find the same thing. Yeah, and I think the real danger there is that those who have all stood together end up falling out with each other. Yes. And I think to a large extent we avoided that. Yeah. And some churches remained independent, some joined other denominations. Yeah. Some we formed with some others a little presbytery of our own. So there was different things. And I don't actually think that was a failure, because I think it was just seeing that different places are different. And some people, if they had existing strong relationships with others in another denomination and in their area, that made a perfectly sensible thing to do. And others made different choices. And I think by and large we've maintained good relations among those who stood together. I think what we found most difficult, though, was, you might call it friendly fire. It felt quite unfriendly actually at the time. Was from other evangelicals who couldn't accept that we were leaving, and were in the end, it felt to us like brothers who stood with us on the gospel. Some, not all, some stood with the institution against us, and it really did seem as though when push came to shove, actually it was a sort of institutional idolatry. Yes, I know that might sound offensive to some, but I do think the love of the institution over, if you can side with gospel-hating people for the national institution against gospel-loving people, I find... Yes. I think that was the thing we found very difficult. So my plea would be to those of you in the Church of England, if there are some of you who feel we must stay forever for the sake of the gospel and other sorts of things, please don't turn against those who feel they cannot do that, because I think that would be the real tragedy. And I would say, sadly, there are ruptured relationships there, which we find difficult. When you have people who you've sat in an evangelical conference with for many years, named on court papers, taking you to court, it's very hard to sort of... for me, it became very hard to go back to a conference like that, where you could sort of pretend that didn't really happen. So I think that would be what I'd be wanting to say. Yes. Don't let that happen. And our situation, we did what we felt we had to do. Yeah. I hope we tried very hard not to say to anybody else, you must do what we're doing. Yes. But I think we did hope that people would at least respect what we were doing. Yes. So that would be my plea. And I think it's almost inevitable that you'll find people who have all been together in the same conferences now in 4 or 5 different situations, and you need to think, well, how are we going to do that?
Yes.
And is there some way that you can keep together and maintain that fellowship?
Relationships and friendships, and keep meeting up?
But there are. It's very difficult. Some people are in very difficult situations, and if you're in a church where your congregation and your leaders are not clear on these things, and you've only been there a little while.
Oh, and there are plenty of those in England.
Yeah, and you think, well, what can I do? My only option is to leave the congregation.
Yes.
And some people felt, well, I don't want to abandon my sheep.
Yeah.
And I totally understand that.
Yes.
I mean, we'd all feel that. It's a very, very difficult thing. And I don't know exactly what I would have done in that situation. Yeah. But what I can say is that in some, and not a few cases, folk have stayed on to protect their sheep, but 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, 10 years later, they've then retired.
Yes.
And then the congregation is scattered, or it's closed down, or something.
Yes.
So actually, they've protected the kingdom in my time. It's sort of peace in the kingdom in my time.
Yes, and I may be wrong, but I just think it's vital to be orthodox and upright, and that sometimes the kindest thing we can do for those entrusted to our charge is to leave. Some people would think I was wrong about that, but I think sometimes that may be, because then they say, oh, this really does matter.
Yeah.
Oh, this is really serious.
I think that, well, the sad fact of the matter is that in the Church of Scotland, in the decade since we left, more than a third of the entire membership of the Church of Scotland has disappeared. The Church of Scotland, in a recent article, I think it was in the Sunday Times, was said to be the biggest property agent in Scotland. Got more property for sale than any other estate agent. If you go on their legal site, you'll see scores, into the hundreds, of church buildings, manses, all being flogged off. I mean, there is a decimation happening. And that's just the reality. And so when things have got to a certain stage, you in your place can't hold it up on your own, because once you're gone, you've no power anymore.
And also we get very obsessed with buildings, because we think to ourselves, well, this building is a vital part of gospel ministry. And it's not a light thing to lose your building, as you know, but it's not the end of the world.
No.
And if you lose your building, even if you end up in house church land where you have no building, and it wouldn't take much for us all to be excluded from schools and community halls. It could happen very quickly. And if we were in house church land, well, we're in house church land. But we must do the right thing.
I think that's right. I mean, our experience was that the Lord provided. We lost a very prominent building.
Yes.
Spent an awful lot of money on it.
Yes. Well, the church we were in, St Andrew the Great, similar.
Yeah.
Although the likelihood of finding another one is very small.
And those are real issues. And actually, I do think in one way, buildings are becoming more important again, just because, as you say, I think churches are going to be frozen out of a lot of, certainly, public buildings.
Yes, I'm a trustee of a little trust, and our vision is really to buy, if we can, buildings, either to house gospel workers or churches.
Yeah. So I think they are becoming important, and that can mean that you look at it and think, well, we mustn't lose it. But I think you're right. I think we have to trust God on that. The Lord has provided for us. It's not been easy, but He has, and I think He will provide. And
yes.
He knows, doesn't He? But yeah, these are tough things, and not to be taken lightly. I mean, and it's costly not just for congregations, but particularly for those in leadership. I mean,
I remember you saying to me how costly it's been for many ministers.
I count myself very fortunate. I mean, I think I came quite close to health breakdown, but I avoided it. But I would say probably at least half of those of my ministry colleagues elsewhere who went through this have suffered very greatly in their health, physical and mental. So it's not by any means to be taken lightly. It's deadly serious, and I think you have to be realistic about that. What we found was that the congregation moved on incredibly quickly.
Yes.
I was staggered actually how little the loss of the building stuck with people. And I mean, we had the most prominent building in the city centre of Glasgow. You can't come into the town without seeing our old building. And I just thought this is going to be terrible for people all of the time. Every time you see it, it's going to be pangs of grief. And it was astonishing. It was like the Lord just took that away. There were perhaps a tiny handful of people who for a time found it difficult, but honestly, it was quite extraordinary. And I found that for myself. I just find I had no feelings for it anymore.
Yes.
And when you've gone through any pastor who's gone through a building project, you know every intimate detail of that. I was astonished at that. But those of our leaders who'd been at the thick of it, the 7 or 8 folk who'd been round the table endlessly at long meetings, agonising, it took a toll on them.
Yes.
And it took me a long time to. It took me a year or two to really get past the exhaustion of it. So,
yes.
You've got to be realistic about that.
Probably a word for those belonging to faithful churches, or perhaps in England, belonging to churches where the minister's faithful, and if they're faithful people, that actually their support for their minister is really important.
Well, it is really important, and because they've got to lead you through this. But that means they've got to be the one who is kind of standing at the front, getting the firing.
Yes.
And so what they can't do is if they're getting arrows in their back as well.
That's right. And I think it means that if you've got a faithful minister, and sometimes you'll find yourself disagreeing that he's doing something, thinking, well, I wouldn't have done it that way. But unless it's a matter of conscience, support him.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, we pray regularly for brethren in the Church of England.
Oh, thank you.
We don't. I can't fathom the machinations of the procedures and practices and the synods and meetings. There always seems to be another critical one in a month's time where the real thing is going to happen, and I can never quite work out when. They seem even better at fudging things and putting things off than they were the Church of Scotland. But
we are masters at fudging things, and things get put off. So the last thing I've just read about the next synod is there's going to be a 3-year process of discernment, and actually it's a recipe for creep, so that de facto false teaching comes in.
Yeah. Yeah, and you look back. We can look back and things that came in. They said, no, it's none of this will be compulsory. There'll be opt-outs, blah blah blah.
We have all that.
And then a few years later, it's no, we've made that decision. Then there's no opt-outs.
Yes.
So I mean, you. One of the things I found was that even among some of our elders, they couldn't. They thought I was. They thought what I was saying about the way the church structures did things was exaggerating. They thought I was painting them in a bad light. When they themselves actually had exposure by coming to a presbytery meeting or at some of the meetings where some of them came to our congregation, their eyes were opened. And, some were saying to me, why were we ever in this in the first place?
Yes.
And I think, it's a shock to people to think that what you're dealing with is blatant devilish behavior.
Yes.
And, that sounds a terrible thing until you open the Bible and, in the place of justice, even there is injustice. In the place of holiness, even there is wickedness. And actually that's the truth.
Yes,
and
yes.
You're not all part of the same thing, just having different perspectives. I mean, think of Jesus and his encounter. You are of your father, the devil.
Well, I was reading just this morning in Luke's Gospel. It was by a presbyterion that Jesus was condemned.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not an anti-Presbyterian comment, but it's just an observation that it's, one historian pointed out a sermon was preached at the burning of Archbishop Cranmer.
Yeah.
So it's not a new thing.
No, and no particular church polity is the answer.
No particular church
polity. I was reading something recently by somebody I know. It was a good article speaking about how really the answer for folks in England is not independency or the Church of England, but the obvious answer is Presbyterianism. It gives you all the best things and all the rest of it. And I thought, well, a lot of what he's saying is true, except that the Church of Scotland was Presbyterian, and that didn't do us much good. So it's not, that the system itself doesn't save you. You've got to have godly people.
But I've often, because I tend to be a bit depressive, and I sort of think, oh, this is awful. And I've often reminded myself that on the last day, the Lord Jesus will raise up every man, woman, and child the Father has given him, and nothing's going to change that.
Yeah. No, so we must. So fear not. That's what I would say. And there is hope. And if you find yourself ejected and out and despised and all the rest of it, there is life and hope and great joy beyond that. Yes. And not to be spending a vast amount of your time fighting institutional battles is a wonderful thing. Yes. And to be able to devote yourself to the things that really matter is a great release.
And that sense of caring for one another, supporting one another, thinking, essentially, I'm on the same side as him. There's lots of things I might disagree with him about, but essentially we are on the same side, and I'm never going to forget that.
Yeah. Don't let institutions or different things break the bonds of real fellowship. Yes. I think that's really important. Yeah. But look, we've talked a lot about this all came from Lamentations, but there's not just Lamentations. There's great joy, and one of the things that I think is a great blessing of your position now is that you get invited to all sorts of places to speak, not just in this country, but in other parts of the world. And I think you'd said you'd been in Singapore recently, and Sweden, and other places. And lots of encouraging things.
It's a great joy. So Sweden, I was in Sweden with Carolyn, my wife, in March. And it was a small Bible conference. It's been running about 6 or 7 years. Not a big thing in Gothenburg. But there are about 150 there, mostly young in their 20s and 30s. And they said to us, when a society becomes so deeply secular, young people grow up knowing that they're starving. There's nothing for their souls.
And maybe Sweden this and a lot of Scandinavia, very, very much so.
Really, yes. So that was encouraging. And then I was in Singapore recently it was actually a Brethren church where they took 760 people away for a church camp.
Wow.
From Thursday to Sunday. They took them all to Kuala Lumpur from Singapore.
Gosh.
But they were mostly 20s and 30s. Loads of these young Singaporean men and women, eager to follow Jesus, hungry for the scriptures. It was just hugely encouraging.
So the Lord has got his people all over the world, hasn't he? And we're so Western centric. Yeah. And even we're just so parochial, really, aren't we? Yes. But the Lord is building his church all over the world, and if the momentum of the Spirit is moving in other parts of the world and great things are happening, that we can find joy in that too, can't we?
Oh, we can. And it humbles us because we're used to feeling we're the centre of the universe and we're the place that matters. And it takes us a few years to wake up to the fact that we're not.
Yeah.
I used to find this at Cornhill in London, that those who came on bursaries especially from sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Asia, I just thought I learned so much from their faith and their courage. Mm-hmm. I think I learned far more from them than they ever might have learned from me or from us.
Yeah. As you know, I go to India most years, and I won't say where or to who, just because things are getting very difficult there. Yeah. Although I certainly am rejoicing that Mr. Modi lost his majority in the recent elections, and I'm hoping that will ease things a little bit for believers. But I come back every time deeply humbled, meeting people who have very, very little, but who I just have wonderful, faithful ministries for the Lord and are on fire for the Lord, and are facing real persecution, real struggles and hardship. I mean, I went back this year, not thinking I was going to go, but the previous year at the end of the conference, people were asked from the front, how many of you have been beaten or arrested or put in prison over this last year because of your ministry. I was sitting in the front row and thought, gosh, I wonder if anybody has. I turned around and more than half of the people put their hands up.
That's very sobering, isn't it?
I was so moved by that.
Yes.
I just thought, I complain about having a long flight and a bit of discomfort and all the rest of it for a few days. I think I won't come next year. Shame on you.
Yes.
I went home and got a ticket for next year because I just thought, well, that's, and that tells you, doesn't it? And yet, what a wonderful encouragement, because you go back next year and these guys all come again.
Yes.
And,
yes.
Amidst a lot of difficulty. So the Lord is not cowed by these sorts of things.
No. And it's a lovely thing at Tyndale House in Cambridge. It's lovely because we get various pastors from all over the world, sometimes from pretty tough areas. We had one from Russia just when the war, he had to go home early when the war started in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Faithful, reformed pastor. It's just very humbling, but it's also very encouraging. You think the Lord has his people. Yeah. And they're showing faith and courage and perseverance.
Crystal, we want you to show faith and courage and perseverance in keeping writing books, which we all need and love. So we will pray for that.
Thank you.
I do pray for that. What else can we pray, particularly for you in the next little while? What are you
I think wisdom to know where to go and what to do and what not to do. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Just as I get older, energy levels, in God's kindness, I'm still in good health, but it just, I can't do what I could do 20 years ago. Yeah. And just wisdom to know where to spend my time and the energy that God gives me. Mm-hmm. And also, to some extent, what to do in terms of the mixture of time devoted to writing and time devoted to speaking or preaching. And actually, just for godliness, I was sharing with I pray with two other younger men at Tyndale House, and I was sharing about some of the temptations that I still have when I'm 70. And they were discouraged, really. These were things about sort of, looking wrongly at a young woman and things. And one of my prayer partners, who's 42, he said, I thought after the age of 42 it was all fine. He said it was both discouraging but encouraging.
That's what we all
that
want
I was
to
still
think,
fighting the battle.
Yeah.
And actually just to pray for godliness.
Yeah. That's what we all need, isn't it, too, isn't it? That we need to keep on fighting the battles and giving a lead to others. No, brother, we will pray for you. We're so grateful to you for coming, and very grateful for this chance to have a chat and catch up and chew the fat over a number of things. Very
grateful to have been invited. It's been a joy.
You're off on holiday to Harris, I think.
We
after
are,
the conference.
Yes. I'm preaching at a free church in Harris, God willing, on Sunday. It will be a new experience for me. And their evening service, I'm not preaching because it's in Gaelic.
Oh, well, you'll be able to... you may need an interpreter, however, for that.
We're going to go. Unless there's a new Pentecost, I won't understand.
Well, we shall pray that you'll have a good time of rest. And
Thank you.
May the Western Isles weather even be kind to you. We wouldn't mind a bit of it being kind to us here, too. Feels like the middle of winter.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you so much for the time to chat, and thank you for coming, and may the Lord bless you in your ongoing ministry.
Thanks so much, Willie. You too.
Thank you.